Welcome to the Are We Nearly There Yet podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, you are so welcome. My name is Sonia, I'm married to James and we have 4 children, and I'm also the families lead at Kerith Community Church. Each week on the podcast, I'm having a different conversation with someone to do with a different aspect of parenting and family life. I hope that you will feel encouraged, you'll feel like you're not alone, you'll feel affirmed, maybe you'll feel challenged, or just get to hear a different experience from somebody different to you. This week I sat down with my friend Lee Herdman and we had a conversation. He is a primary school head teacher and he's got lots of experience in children's ministry. So we talked about discipleship in the home and we talked about children getting ready to return to school in September. Why don't you make yourself a cup of tea or whatever your drink of choice is, have a sit down and listen in to our conversation. So Lee, welcome so much to the Are We Nearly There Yet podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, feeling great to have the opportunity to talk to you.
It's so good to have you with us. So many people, certainly within Kerith, won't know who you are because you don't actually come to Kerith Community Church. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, you've introduced me as Lee. In my real life, I'm a head teacher of a 2-form entry primary school in Sunbury, a school I started at in April, mid-lockdown, which has been very interesting. Alongside that, I've had the privilege of being involved in children's ministry for over 20 years. I've written books, been involved in cross-church children's ministry, discipleship and outreach too. So yeah, a whole bundle of stuff really.
And we've known each other a long time, haven't we? We go back most of those 20 years probably, I think.
I think I worked out it was about 17 years, yes.
Is it 17? Yeah. We've served together on various children's ministry teams and at one point we're part of the same church at the same time, weren't we? So it's so great to have you on here chatting to me today. The first question I ask everyone is, who is family to you? Whether that's your family growing up or your family now.
Yeah, that's you did tell me before our conversation that you're going to ask this question, and actually it got me thinking. So I've obviously got a biological family, 2 lovely parents, a younger brother and sister. Yes, I know the challenge of being the oldest child.
Me too. Me too.
Man, it's the struggle.
We're the test
spiritual
child.
battle. It's a spiritual battle every day. And then also, obviously, I've got some great friends. You and James are definitely within that group.
Good.
But I've also been really blessed with church family. My own biological family were not attenders of church when I was growing up. My first connection with church was being invited to a Sunday school, and from a very, very young age, a minibus used to come and collect me and take me to Sunday school every week. The church folk there just loved me and looked after me and made sure I didn't miss out on anything. So for me, church is a really key part of my own family experience too.
Yeah, that's so good. And how that invitation from that person to church, how you came to know Jesus yourself as a child. I believe you were a child when you first became friends with Jesus.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So for me, church connection, relationship, friendship was definitely something that was really important to me from a really, really young age. I never wanted to miss out on Sunday school. I never wanted to miss out on the community of church, and it really was an all-age community in the sense that older folk would come and collect me and take me to church if I needed to. They would buy presents and send Christmas cards and chase up if I wasn't there and just make me feel really welcome. So yeah, that was really powerful for me. But it probably was at about the age of 7 when things started to really make sense for me in a spiritual way. I remember being in a service for all ages, and people were invited to come to the front to pray if they wanted to give their lives to Jesus. I must have been about 7, and I remember not doing it during the service, but feeling really compelled to response. to respond, because I mean, I really loved Jesus, and the more I learnt about him and understood about him, the more I wanted him to be number one in my life. So I remember at the end of the service, whilst everyone was having tea and coffee, creeping towards the front of the church, and one of my children's leaders seeing me there and kneeling with me to pray and asking me what it was that I wanted. And I remember very clearly just saying I wanted to follow Jesus, and I wanted him to be the most important person in my life, and praying for that and being prayed for, and then leaving that place feeling different, definitely feeling different. That incident really sticks out in my mind. And then since then, there have been lots of moments as a child, as a teenager, where I felt I've grown with that commitment or remade that commitment. Moments when I've really felt the Holy Spirit at work in my life. Really, really privileged to have been surrounded not only by amazing children's and youth workers, but actually by church members who've really invested in me too. They wouldn't consider themselves children's workers or youth workers, but they've made an equally important impact on my life. So yeah, grateful for all of that. God is good.
Yeah, and what he's done through you over the years to impact probably hundreds of children's lives for him. I'd say it's well into the hundreds, wouldn't you? The amount of children that you've served alongside on kids' teams, or whether it's now in your school community as well.
I feel really privileged to have had the opportunity to influence those lives, and I feel really blessed and encouraged because I can look back and see what God has done through me. And there are many young people who I've had the opportunity to speak to and have come to realize there are things that I've taught or said or done that God has inspired me to do, and it's made a difference for them. So yeah, a real privilege. Yeah.
And at 7, I love now you as a man who is 1 year older than me, so obviously that makes you about 23, is that right? No, you're what, 40?
I think I'm 1 year younger than you, yeah.
Yeah, did I say 1 year younger? Yeah, 1 year younger. That's 41. I'm not quite as young as that. But
I'm just a baby in comparison.
But in your early 40s, you still have this impactful moment of you as a child at 7, which I'm sure has interwoven itself throughout your experience in terms of how you've wanted to pour back and influence children in the whole of your life, and influence children to get into a relationship, into a best friendship with Jesus. The power of that moment, like hearing you speak of it now, as you could say, oh well, I kind of wanted to know a bit about Jesus, and then it grew, and then it was when I, we often hear like when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult was when I really made a commitment, and that is some people's story. But for many people, they are sincerely, and many children, they make that sincere, first, all-in choice to follow Jesus as a child, don't they?
They do, and I think sometimes we neglect to see the importance of giving children the opportunity to choose. I think it's totally powerful and important that children have the opportunity to develop and to grow in faith. And I know that whenever I have the opportunity to pray for a child, particularly a newborn, my prayer is that they never know a day when they don't know Jesus. That's my absolute prayer. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we lead children to a moment when they can choose for themselves to follow Jesus. We know that Jesus values children and that he calls them to be in his presence. There are so many stories in the Gospels where that happens. And I think that as children's ministers, as parents, as families, it's absolutely okay, without pressure, without turning it into something hugely scary, that we give children the opportunity to respond and choose, and know that Jesus uses children to reach and bless others too, that they can operate in the gifts of the Spirit. I think, we've all heard it many times, there's no junior Holy Spirit, and that's so true.
Yeah, so true. We're going to pause a little bit on that part and come back to that in a while. I was really struck by what you said about members of the church who didn't consider themselves to be on the children's ministry team, the kids team, that were just as much influencing you and helping you in your journey as much as people who'd kind of signed up to do kids work, signed up to do children's ministry. But we'll park all that for a moment, because I'd like to talk a little bit to you about you as a head teacher over the last few months, Lee. How's it been, and have you managed to have a bit of a rest over the last couple of weeks?
The last couple of weeks could not have come more quickly enough, I have to say. It has been, I mean, I've been a head teacher now for just over 5 years.
Yeah.
And been fortunate to go to some very lovely community schools where we've been able to make a really big difference for children and families, schools which perhaps in the first instance have not been living out their potential, and have had the opportunity to be involved in shaping those and working with the teams there. But yeah, starting at my most recent school in April, I did have about a term when I was working across both schools. So I can say that in March of this year, I closed 2 schools down. It's been really, and leading the staff there, it's been really interesting, really challenging, really exhausting, and also, yeah, just quite unique.
So a lot of it in the beginning, you were leading you were new to this school as this new head teacher who people didn't really know that well, and you're leading them all from a distance, I guess, because we were all in full lockdown. You hadn't even met some of your staff while you were leading them. Is that right?
I had met them, so I'd been into school for a few times, for a few meetings. Staff were aware of me because thankfully the school is within the trust that my older school was in, so they were aware of me. But yes, having to take the lead very quickly, trying to organise staff, rotas, the senior leadership team, managing staff who were needing to shield, setting up support systems for really vulnerable children and families. Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
I've learned a lot. I think I've learned a lot through that time. But actually what's been really powerful is seeing how my staff have accepted my leadership, which is quite incredible considering they didn't really have time to learn to trust me. They had to do that really quickly. So that's been just quite a unique experience. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm a mum. We didn't say earlier, so you're a single guy, you don't have any of your own children other than all of the spiritual children that you have influenced over the years, of which there are many. But as a parent, I'm thinking, okay, it's now kind of mid to late August. My children are going to be going back to school for the first time. 3 of my children are starting a new school. Parents listening to this podcast, as a head teacher, what would you say to us as we approach the next few weeks and our children are reintegrating back into school? Of course, some children have still been going to school throughout. Some children may have joined towards the tail end of last term, but the majority of school children weren't in school, were they? And now all of a sudden, we think anyway, that as things currently stand as we're recording this, all children will be starting back at school in September. How should we approach that? What kind of things should I be doing to prepare my children for that, do you think, in your professional view as a head teacher?
That's the $1 million question, and lots and lots of thoughts around that. I think the first thing that I would want to emphasize is that as a school, we want our children to be back in our communities again. We know that they benefit massively from the experience, from the relationships and the connections, from the routine. We can't wait to have children back. Schools are just not the same without them. I know that schools and teachers have had a lot of bad press, and I'm not sure that the vast majority of it is justified at all, because as a head teacher, we want more than ever to be offering the best for the children in our community. But please bear with us, because whilst that is absolutely the case, we're needing to tread very carefully as we move into this kind of new way of being. And we've had a chance to practice to some extent before the summer, where we had partial opening for children of critical workers and vulnerable children, and then we opened to some targeted year groups. We've had a chance to practice, but we're still learning too. So in the first instance, I would say, please bear with us. Understand you want your children back in school, but actually we're going to be doing and trying some things that we hope will minimize any potential risk to children. I'm not aware of huge cases of outbreaks of COVID. So I think that the things that we've been doing seem to be working well. So I think in the first instance, as a parent, you need to find your confidence in what's going to happen in September. And it's okay to be asking the school questions. We want you to work with us. We want to know what your concerns are, and we want to help you and support you. Mm. The second thing I would say is that once you've found your confidence, share that with your children. So begin gently talking to them about returning to school. What are they looking forward to? What are they nervous about? What are they anxious about? Start praying about it, but thinking about it positively, but honestly, because your child will have all sorts of views and questions. Some children would have had the most amazing time whilst on lockdown and actually are not looking forward to being separated from their parents. Some children would have had an okay time, but will be desperate to get back with their friends. And some children will have found lockdown really, really tough. Yeah. So it's about recognizing as well that your journey as a family is going to be very different from other families and from other children, and not feeling guilty about that and not putting any pressure on your child as a result of that. So gently asking questions, gently asking what they're looking forward to, what they're anxious about, and if it's possible, responding to some of their questions using information perhaps that the school has given. Yeah. So I would say, yeah, think positively but honestly, and talk honestly and positively about it, and start those conversations now. You don't want to be starting those conversations the day before school starts. This is going to be a fairly big transition for most children. So take the time, take the opportunity that you have to hang out, to begin listening and to begin talking about returning to school. At the same time, I would also suggest that you open up opportunities for children to share their story of lockdown, even if they've spent that time with you. Mm-hmm. What you want to hear from them is, what have they learnt? What have they achieved? What have they enjoyed? What have they disliked about lockdown? As I've said, for some children, it would have been the most amazing experience. And for others, we're expecting that actually the time of lockdown would have been a period of adverse experience or trauma. And the advice that we're receiving within schools and as a head teacher is that children need to be able to tell their story of lockdown, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They need to be able to share all of it. And for children who have experienced lockdown as a sort of trauma, unless they are able and willing to take the opportunity to share their story, then actually they're going to find healing really, really tricky. So offer your children lots of opportunities to talk about, to paint, to write about, to talk with others about their experience of lockdown. And be mindful that if it has been a tricky time for your children, it's not your fault. I think that there'll be lots and lots of parental guilt at the moment. Parents who've struggled perhaps to do the home learning. Yeah. I don't know a parent who hasn't struggled with the home learning, in all fairness.
Even teacher parents struggle with it, you know.
Even more so, I think, because they have this brilliant idea of what learning and teaching looks like, and actually when it's your own child and they're being stubborn and refusing to take part, then it's difficult. So yeah, I think there's lots and lots of guilt around. Some guilt maybe about having to stay in lockdown, not doing all the things that you might see other families doing. And I think we've got to together resolve that. So maybe it's not just about children sharing their stories, but it's about parents sharing their stories honestly too, about what they've felt, what they've experienced, and what they would do differently. Because, you know, if we're moving out of this period of time, I think it's going to be important that we don't live with that guilt. Yeah.
It's funny, I was just saying to somebody just earlier today that's one of the things. I always get to the end of the summer holidays and I'm not someone who's desperate for my children to go back to school, because I'm just, and no judgment on anyone that is, we're all different. But this year, I'm still not desperate for them to, but there will be a sense of relief when they're back in school that I won't have to feel guilty all day long while I'm trying to juggle work and the children. And I think at the moment we need so much grace for each other and so much grace for ourselves. So you started off, saying we need grace for schools who've never done this before. They're trying a new way of doing things. So we need grace for our teachers, for the school management teams, for grace for one another. Some of us will be feeling more anxious. Some children will feel more anxious. Some children will be fine and just get on with it. But yeah, I just think we need bucket loads of grace. We need to not forget to allow that grace for ourselves as well.
And I think it's about, I think this is coming out of this is going to be all about relationship.
Yeah.
So yes, that's about parents' relationships with their children. We talked about being honest and open. It's about relationships, working in partnership with school. But also we need to recognize that in the midst of all of this, we don't stand alone. Thank goodness we hope. We have Jesus standing with us in all of this. And he is that we can turn to for support. He's someone who's listening to our story, who's actually been a part of our story. So thank goodness for faith in all of this.
Absolutely.
I guess my other pointer would be that we recognize that there are some children who have really specific needs.
Yeah.
And those children with perhaps special educational needs or disabilities might need something a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And I would say to parents, really lean on that partnership with the school. I know that the inclusion leader in my school has been having individual meetings with parents of children with education, health and care plans. We've got social stories that we're producing. We're organising visits to school for the children. We've created videos for them so they can see what it's going to be like. But don't be afraid to lean on that partnership. So if you've not heard from your special educational needs coordinator or inclusion leader, just make contact. So yeah, really make use of that partnership. The schools are really wanting to help.
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned stories a couple of times, and I think that's so important as well. We're now in this kind of season of, we did this full lockdown thing, and then actually we've had this kind of in-between season, and the summer holidays have fallen in that. And it's easy to now think, okay, we're in summer holidays and now we're going to go back to normal because everyone's going to school and it's all normal. And we move on without having a chance, as you say, to allow children to tell their story, share their story. And for us as well, I think, whether we're coming from a parental or professional point of view, whatever it is, we had, one of my children was awake last night, really late, really upset, couldn't communicate what was wrong. You mentioned painting and doing things. They couldn't really communicate what was wrong, and so they drew us a picture, and it was about missing their friends, the picture. And even though they've actually seen their friends a couple of times now, that still now, when we were in full tight lockdown, it was kind of okay. But now coming out of this, it's like realizing actually this last few months has taken a toll. In the crisis moment, in the thick of it, this child was okay. This particular child of mine was okay, but now some of that stuff is starting to come out after the events and and as things are starting to go back to normal, you can look back and think what wasn't normal. And I think it's giving our children permission to still share that stuff as well, and not be dismissive of their feelings or emotions and think, oh, you're fine, get back to normal. We do need to make that time, don't we, to stop and to listen to our children, and to stop. And it's the same with ourselves as well. Stop and listen to ourselves and notice our triggers, notice different behaviours that are coming out, whether that's for ourselves or whether for our kids. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, in the world of psychology, they talk about the fact that it takes about 13 weeks to create a habit.
Yeah.
Well, we've had over 13 weeks of uncreating habits.
Yeah.
So for our children, there is a real lack of routine, and they're going to need to establish good habits again.
Yeah.
Maybe different habits again, and it's going to take time. I think it's going to take a long time for children to fully come to terms with and understand what has happened. Now, children are incredibly resilient, so I'm not talking about this in particularly a negative way. I think it's just more about expressing yourself, expressing your feelings, because we know that that's a healthy thing to do. It enables you to be resilient. It enables you to move forward. I think over the coming months, possibly even years, we're going to see snippets of story and information and feeling being expressed. And we've got to give ourselves and our children permission for that to happen.
Yeah. And as you say, expressing the good stuff as well. Like as a family, we had so much fun at times, and you almost felt, well, I almost felt bad experiencing that fun in lockdown and this little adventure that we were on in our family, because so much outside was going on that was so horrible and so hard for so many people. But actually we had a lot of fun and we had adventures, but they can, still allowing to reflect and tell the fun side of it, as well as the sad side and the hard side.
I would say just don't carry too many assumptions about how positive or negative lockdown has been for your children or for other people's children. Prepare yourself to be surprised, because there will be things that they will have found especially challenging that they haven't even contemplated yet.
And maybe don't know how to verbalize it.
They've not got the vocabulary or the in which to express it. I know that as a head teacher, I'm planning to have a big chunk of time in these first few weeks back in September, where we're actually going to be organising a kind of history maker fortnight, where we're going to frame children's experience within the context of social history and give them an opportunity to express that in all sorts of different ways: poetry and music and words and art. And then we're going to have an e-exhibition to kind of celebrate that. I guess celebrate is the word, at least share it, but just opening up those opportunities for children. And I think we need to be finding those opportunities, but also know that sometimes how children express their own thoughts and feelings doesn't happen in quite a neat way, and it happens in a messy way. And like you said, it will happen at bedtime. It will happen with children not sleeping. It will happen with children falling out with their siblings. It might happen with them rebelling. It might happen with them just seeking more time with you. So just be watching and be prepared for some surprises, I guess.
Yeah, as you say, be prepared for anything, which is kind of a good mantra for children at any time, whatever's going on in the world. Be prepared for anything to happen when
they are quite surprising sometimes, aren't they, children?
Definitely. Well, that's really useful, and I hope all the parents listening will be reassured by what you say, will have taken some stuff on board. And as you say, we're not doing this alone, which is so great. No. I would like to move back then to your children's ministry hat. You take off the head teacher hat, put back on your children's ministry hat. Church hasn't been meeting, has it? Church hasn't been meeting for a long time. To my knowledge, churches aren't going back to normal or starting meeting again. I think there might be the occasional church here and there that are meeting again, but most churches aren't meeting again from September in the way that schools will be. So we're maybe looking at a longer stretch of children not being part of church family community in the same way. Obviously, lots of churches have moved online. They've tried different creative things, and nothing is ever going to replace that word that we've already brought up a couple of times, relationship and connection in the same way. And I'm really interested in your thoughts of that in terms of what church might look like before we go back to some sense of normal, but then also as well when we do go back to normal. And as parents, what can we be doing for that faith formation and discipleship of our children? I've always been really strong on saying, as someone who's been involved in children's ministry my whole entire life, my whole adult entire life anyway, church for Christian parents, kids' church is an add-on. It's like the icing on the cake on a Sunday. It's not the main ingredients in the cake. But as a Christian parent, it's my responsibility at any time to disciple my children rather than just pass them off to the kids team to expect them to do it. It's my primary responsibility as a Christian parent. But I'm really interested in your thoughts around, like, culturally where we're sitting with that at the moment and how we can respond to children and step into that gap, I guess, try and step into that gap that won't be there, that is missing at the moment because of the world it is.
So I think as a single man who doesn't have children of my own in the home, lots of what I might say comes very easily when I recognise the great challenge that it is being in a family and growing and influencing your children on a daily basis. So I need to come with that as a kind of prerequisite, I need to, and a caveat, like the things that I'm sharing, the things that I'm seeing, the things that are on my heart come from, I know, not within the context of a family, but that's not to say that what I'm thinking is not resonating with others who are in families. I'm part of lots of children's ministry networks and forums, and some of the things that I've been observing or suggesting seem to be resonating with those out there.
Lee, I would just like to give you a caveat and permission, give you permission to speak into it. Don't feel you can't, you don't have a voice because you don't have children living within your home, because I know I've known you for many years, and I know that you are someone who really understands children very, very well. So we want to learn from you. So you go for it.
Well, the first thing that I would say is that we have probably in the church a rather unusual idea of what ministry to children needs to look like. That's not to say that what is happening in the church or in families is not amazing or impressive or wonderful, or that God is not using it. But I think it is a reflection of our time. When I look at what biblical faith formation and discipleship looks like, it is quite different from what we're seeing in the church. And I think what you've said about church being the kind of icing on the cake and the ministry that we can provide there is absolutely true. But we cannot neglect to know and realize that faith formation and discipleship primarily needs to happen in the home. That's where it will have most impact. That's really where lives are completely changed. Now, that's not to add unnecessary pressure on families, but it is to say that actually you owning your faith as a family is really key for the direction that your child will choose to live in the future. I think lots of research would suggest that the highest percentage of adult Christians actually they choose to follow Jesus before the age of 12. And so I can't help but think that their experience in the home is fundamentally important. But what I want to add to that is that what I'm not talking about in the home is that you do unusual, super holy things necessarily. I'm not talking about you learning passages of scripture off by heart and every day having a family Bible study with crafts and games and watching online videos. That's absolutely not what I'm suggesting.
So me setting your alarm at 5 a.m. and doing a 3-hour Bible study before anyone does anything isn't what we should be doing in my home?
I mean, if you're doing that, that's wonderful.
I'm not.
But what I would say is that having spoken to lots of families from within the church, they're pretty tired, actually, and exhausted at the moment. And I think when you talk to them then about spiritual formation and discipleship, what they're imagining is them running like a children's program, like Kerith Kids, in their home. And actually that's not a biblical model of spiritual formation or discipleship. For me, there are 4 really key elements of really natural home faith formation and discipleship. And I have to say that they are gloriously messy, because that's what family life is like. That's what life is like altogether. But they should be natural. So for me, Deuteronomy 6 really provides a strong model. In Deuteronomy 6, it talks about talking with our children as we walk along the road, tying them to our doorposts. You know, it should be our bread and butter family experience. And these 4 elements. Firstly, it's about sharing stories. Stories are powerful. They're powerful for us as adults. That's why so many people watch films, soap operas. We love a story. They hook us. It's why children love stories repeated over and over again. You'll know that bedtime story that your children love to hear. So we need to share stories. Yes, those are Bible stories. That's powerful. It's important our children know the Word of God. But actually, it's also about sharing our family story. It's about talking again and again about times when we've prayed about things as a family or as individuals, and we've seen God show up and respond and answer our prayers, or times when we can be honest and say God didn't respond in the way that we were expecting. It's about honest faith sharing stories. And I know some families who like to keep things like prayer diaries. So the things they're praying for as a family can be noted down, and then they go back and look after a few weeks or after a few months to see how God has answered them. And then those become their family stories. I know of families that just tell a story in response to how people are feeling. So if your children's going through a really moody time, you can talk about how you've felt when you've been through a moody time and how worshipping God has led you out of that. But real stories, real experiences, real moments of encounter for you as parents, but also for you as a family. Keep telling those family stories. Don't let them forget. And there's a real biblical precedent to that. Every time a momentous occasion happened in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, something would be built to remind the people of what God had done. And it's why we often share bread and wine, right? So that we can remember the story of our faith. We can remember the story of what Jesus has done for us as a community, but also for us individually. So sharing stories and doing that naturally all the time and building up that collection of stories so that we don't forget them and we remember them. So stories, and then asking questions, and particularly being willing to ask some of the big questions, as well as the small questions, allowing children space and time to answer, even if it's not an answer that you would want to hear, or not the one that you're expecting, but just giving children the opportunity to answer, and then adults the opportunity to answer, so that you're genuinely learning from one another. Asking about, yes, how you responded to a particular situation, or how you would respond to it again if another incident were to occur. What would you do differently? What would Jesus have done in that situation? Just remembering that questions, even the big ones, are ones that children are willing to start grappling with. I often talk to children about questions being like, or good questions, being like treasure boxes. And each time we approach that question, we bring a different key and we try to unlock it. And sometimes our key doesn't unlock it on that occasion, but then we can come back again and again and again until we find the keys that work for us. And sometimes we manage to open up the treasure box, but we only manage to scrabble around at the treasure on the surface. And then the next time we approach it, we realize there's more treasure lying underneath, and then more treasure lying underneath that. And how across our lives, the same questions will allow us to answer in different ways. And so asking questions is really powerful. Plan your questions, but also just use the questions that arise in the spur of the moment, and encourage children to ask questions too. Yeah. And then I would say, take time to encounter God as a family, encountering God in different ways. Yes, in praying together, praying collectively as a family, maybe praying one-to-one when stuff happens, praying when transition is going on. It can be about inviting God to share pictures and words, to encourage somebody whose birthday it is, or somebody who's leading you, but just take that time to encounter God. Sometimes it's about sharing time silently as a family, just enjoying a piece of music or enjoying a moment together and thinking about the things that you want to thank God for. Sometimes it's just about being silent.
Yeah.
And then turning that encounter into another shared story. So actually, God showed up in that moment of silence and he gave you a picture, and then you shared it with somebody and they were really, really encouraged. Yeah. Actually, let's keep telling that story, so that maybe that will shape children's habits and it will change their lives. So when we're talking about faith formation and discipleship in the home, let's not think it's about finding another crossword or playing a messy game or dressing up or waving a puppet in the air. Let's think about it as sharing stories, asking questions, encountering God, and then turning that encounter into another shared story.
That's so good, Lee. I think there's a real, we put pressure on ourselves and we think, oh, we've got to be these whizzy, amazing kids TV presenters, or like, yeah, as you say, puppeteers or amazing at arts and crafts, and let's really dig into like it's almost like producing another curriculum on top of all the home learning and stuff. But it's just got to be so organic and natural and interwoven into every aspect of family life. Like, we don't. I know as a family, we don't sit down and kind of study the Bible as much as maybe we should or could, but we do take time to kind of just simply pray for things in the moment. The other day I was we went to our first outing to somewhere with a roller coaster since this whole thing's happened, and one of my children was really scared about the roller coaster they were about to go on, so we just prayed there, sat in the roller coaster, prayed, asked Jesus to take away his fear and to make this particular child brave, and they went on and loved the roller coaster. And then, as you say, that's something that turns into a story. Then they tell their siblings, well, next time they're fearful, they know they can ask Jesus to help them. They can ask Jesus to be with them. And I tell you that without trying to sound at all like we've got it all together, because as I said, there's loads we don't do. But it is just finding those moments, I think, just seeking. I love the seeking to encounter as well, and the stillness and the silence. I think whether that's within the home or whether that's in an organised kids' church, often we think that everything's got to be really zany and crazy and noisy all the time with children. But so many times, I know you and I have been in the same room at the same time with children where they've encountered the Holy Spirit in the silence, and it's just been so powerful, hasn't it? We don't have to have them being really noisy all the time. Actually, let's be still, let's be calm, let's listen for God's voice.
And let's remember, we don't need to work hard to be present with God, because he wants to be present with us, and it's the same for our children. So we don't need big fangled events. You don't need lights and smoke machines to create a moment of encounter for children, although those things can help contribute to creating an atmosphere of people who want to meet with God. So I'm not saying that those things are bad.
No, they're good. Yeah,
we don't need to do those things, because God definitely wants to be with us and to love us, and God has a real heart for children. Jesus showed us that time and time again. And what you've said about discipleship in the home should be natural and messy, and those experiences are the ones that children will remember forever. I love those moments in church when children just sit and soak in the presence of God. Those moments where you get them to spread out somewhere in the room. They often choose to hide under tables or under chairs if they can. That's a children thing to do. But it's those moments when we talk about them being in a bubble with just them and God, that God really speaks to them. Yeah, powerful.
Really powerful. I think there's loads more we could talk on that, which maybe pertains more to kind of children's ministry. And maybe we'll have a separate episode where we chat about children's ministry, which would be great for like the kids team to access. But there's been so much richness in that, and it's just got to be natural and organic, and no pressure on us as parents to think, right, and now we've got another thing we have to do. Like, just be if we're as parents connected in with Jesus, then it will just flow. I believe it will just flow from us. And I think just that honesty in family life of when it is messy, and I get impatient with my children sometimes, but then apologizing, saying sorry to God and saying sorry to them and telling them I've said sorry to God, and that in itself is a story to tell them, and it's just it's just really important that we're real. And life is messy, throw some kids into the mix, it's even messier, but we're just all chasing and seeking Jesus together.
Absolutely. And I think there's I don't often sing old hymns, but there's a line from an old hymn that really sticks in my mind, which says, "Only as I truly know him can I make him truly known." If you want your children to know Jesus, if you want your children to have faith, then your starting place has got to be you and your relationship with him. Yeah.
That's so good. Thank you, Lee, for coming and chatting to us. I've got one more question for you before you are released from this conversation. You can go about your day, probably doing planning for school returns in September. But I would love to know, we ask everyone on this podcast, and most people that have come on this podcast so far have been parents. So, and as you know, it's called Are We Nearly There Yet? Which I'm sure you'll know, even though you haven't got kids of your own, that's on a long journey, or often just a short journey sometimes. Children will say, "Oh, we're nearly there yet." And we're thinking of ourselves, we've been thinking of mostly through the lens of parenting, but just thinking of the journey that we're on. And I ask everyone that comes on, thinking about the journey. So you're thinking about your journey, Lee, as you know, now you're a head teacher, like the years you've served and worked within the field of children's ministry as well. Thinking about the journey you've been on, what essential items would you have taken in your luggage at the start of the journey if you knew then what you know now?
Yeah, powerful. I think we are all leaders in some form or another, aren't we? So whether we find ourselves as a parent whose prime role is caring for children, whether we find ourselves in a school or in another kind of workplace, whether we find ourselves in our community, we're all people of influence. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, as a person of influence, whatever that influence looks like, what I would tell myself is be sure of your values, be sure of what you stand for, and don't be distracted from that. So now as an adult, I know that for me, the places that God has led me, the roles that he's given me the privilege of taking on, have been real roles of hope, of real roles requiring faith, wanting what is best and wanting something better for myself and for others. And so for me, it's about being sure of that value in my life, always hoping, never giving up hope, always being compassionate, always demonstrating love and making my decisions and planning my next steps and creating whatever it is that I'm creating from a place of love. And then also being a person who's passionate. I think that Jesus calls us to be people who are passionate. What he demonstrated for us was amazing passion. And actually what we're involved in terms of mission and ministry, we have to be passionate about, because it's a matter of life and death. So for me, it's about holding on to those values and not being distracted by the other stuff, because there's so much other stuff that will distract you. So yeah, for me, I guess the piece of advice that I would give myself is hold on to those values that you know are important, and they're all values lived out in the life of Jesus. Hold on to those values and don't be distracted by other stuff where you could spend hours of your time doing it, but achieving very little. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Are We Nearly There Yet? I've loved talking to you. Will you come back again and talk about children's ministry?
If I've got something useful to share, of course.
I'm sure you have. We hope the start of the new term goes well for you. And on behalf of parents everywhere, I want to say thank you to you and teachers and everyone working in education, because, yeah, we appreciate you and we love you. The bad press, ignore it, because you're great. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I'll catch up with you soon.
Great, take care.
Well, as a parent, I found that really useful, and I hope that you did as well. Big thanks to my friend Lee there for coming and talking to me. He's got a wealth of knowledge and experience about children, about children's relationship with Jesus. He's so passionate about children knowing Jesus. Why don't we start those conversations with our kids about returning to school, if we haven't already, of course, and let's be intentionally praying for their start at school. Let's be praying for all of those working in education, because it's going to be a strange time for everyone as they try and navigate this new look of school. I loved what he said about us, faith formation in the home, and as parents, let's be supporting each other, holding each other up in prayer as we interweave that faith formation with our kids into the everyday messy life that we have in family. We hope you've enjoyed this week on Are We Nearly There Yet? Come back next time.